We're taking a look at the rise of domestic extremism in America after the assault on the U.S. Capitol. An ongoing series by Frontline, ProPublica, and Berkeley Journalism's investigative reporting program is examining the evolution of far-right extremist groups like the Boogaloo Boys. Their work, which includes a documentary, American Insurrection, centers on Stephen Carrillo, a U.S. Air Force sergeant and member of the group charged with killing 2 officers in California in 2020. Kathryn Hurd and Ellie Lightfoot, who are graduate student reporters at Berkeley and contributed to this piece, along with Gisela Perez-Diacha, join us with more. Thank you all for being with us. This is such a fascinating reporting project. Kathryn, can you tell us more about who Stephen Carrillo is and how you were able to get in contact with him and why he agreed to speak with you?
Absolutely. Well, first off, thank you so much for having us. We're really excited to be here. Stephen Carrillo was an active duty Air Force man who was basically now facing charges for the murder of a federal security officer in Oakland last summer during the Black Lives Matter protests, and then a week later, a sheriff's deputy in his hometown of Santa Cruz, California. And based on our proximity to where the crimes occurred, being in Berkeley, our editor at the time basically asked us to start digging into who he was. And from there, we started creating relationships with people in his life, specifically his family, who was able to eventually put us in touch with Stephen Carrillo as he awaits trial in Santa Rita jail.
Ellie, in a memo obtained by CBS News last month, the Department of Homeland Security told its employees that it was going to be launching an internal investigation looking into the potential threat of domestic violent extremism within its own ranks. What did your investigation uncover about military members embracing extremist ideology? What did you learn from Carrillo about this and why someone like him would be drawn towards these extremist groups?
Yeah, I think for a variety of reasons. The underground militia group that we discovered that Stephen was a part of actually embraced a lot of military rank structure and values. We obtained like 35 pages of documents from their onboarding materials, and within those, it's really clear that they embrace people with military skills like firearm training, combat training, and so I think it's a natural leap for some people to be drawn to militia groups in general. Yeah.
So, Kathryn, what did you learn from this specific story about how far-right extremist views, how they view the police, and how does it relate to the January 6th riot? Because one of the most striking images of that day were people that were holding Blue Lives Matter flags, beating police officers or fighting police officers. We saw tons of images like that, and it was just sort of a striking juxtaposition with some of those flags and some of their actions.
Absolutely. Well, what we can see from the Stephen Carrillo case is, first off, he was an active duty of the Air Force. He was in the military, and not only that, but he was a member of the security forces, which is sort of the law enforcement branch of the military. And what we saw is that at this period of time, he was linking up with people who were very like-minded to him and had very anti-police views. And I think under the Trump presidency, a lot of these people were feeling more emboldened to take action on behalf of their beliefs. And I think what we can see from Stephen Carrillo is that he was not alone. He was operating with a highly militarized and skilled group, which I think just goes to demonstrates the threat that is posed by these groups, and probably demonstrates why the Biden administration is investing more money in focusing on these types of groups.
Either Ellie or Kathryn, I don't know, I totally understand what you said, Ellie, about why members of the military are drawn to these groups if they embrace a culture that they're familiar with, right? There's order, there's rank, or whatever. But at the end of the day, I also think But it's an extremist racist group. I mean, there are other outlets. Surely there are other organizations that will take advantage of, your training in the military. I still can't see why men like this would be drawn to an organization that, from the outside, it looks like, despite the law and order, when we look at the Capitol riot, it's an embrace of chaos. It doesn't look like order to me at all. I mean, in some of your reporting, some of your interviewing, were you able to sort of drill down into kind of the root motivation?
A lot of these people feel like we need protection against the government and against the police. And that is sort of what drew this specific group that CREO was a part of together. It was very much so centered in an anti-police ideology. The Boogaloo is a term for an insurrection that will occur against the government. And this group that CREO was a part of, as we mentioned, had a militarized structure, was basically preparing for that and embracing those ideals. And so what you see is people coming together in a more formalized structure with anti-police views and centering around that, bonding around that, and taking action on behalf of that.
Ellie,
Kathryn, you were going to jump in.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, so I also think there's just a central irony kind of undergirding this is, Stephen CREO worked for the government. He was an active duty airman, but yet he felt a really urgent need to protect against domestic terrorism, which he thought was coming from the government. And I think it all comes back to this, oath that they take to protect enemies, foreign and domestic, and in his head that he thought that the government was overcroaching, and so I think there is a kind of central irony that a lot of these Boogaloo boys are aware of, that are part of military structures in America. I talked to a Boogaloo boy that said that I pointed this out, and he was like, it takes like working in the military to understand the problems. And yeah, I mean, it is a mystery, but I don't know.
Well, so it's interesting, Kathryn.
It takes one to know one.
Well, yeah, and that's sort of, the other thing that we've learned about these extremist groups is that they're suspicious of the media. I mean, we just did a whole segment on just the general population of this country not putting the media or placing trust in the media. That's eroded over the last several years. So the question, of course, is why they chose to speak with you. I know we sort of asked that, but I want to drill down a little bit more into their understanding of what it is that they would gain or not from talking to journalists like the two of you, along with your partner, or is it because they're trying to sort of expand their reach, which, as you know, as journalists, sometimes has the opposite effect. In other words, people will say, well, why are we giving these individuals a platform to spout their racist views and theories and conspiracy theories?
Yeah, I definitely think that you always reach sort of a point of conflict as a journalist when you're talking to these people, and you have to try to strike a careful balance of, providing a platform for them to, speak about these types of beliefs, moreover than just trying to dispel them and understand them. What we noticed from our story is a lot of people felt very misunderstood by the media, and not every single person that we talked to felt that the media was the enemy necessarily, but more that they weren't taking the time to get things right, and that they would, hear one thing and run with it. And I think a lot of what we learned from talking to these people is that they had a desire to be understood in a new way, in addition to probably, reaching a broader group of people with the specific understanding that they had about their group. So a lot of Boogaloo boys, for example, felt that the media was calling them white supremacists, but a lot of people in the Boogaloo movement don't believe that they're white supremacist movement. They believe that they are a libertarian ideology that's race blind, color blind, that embraces a bunch of different people with different backgrounds, but are united under this idea of anti-government, anti-police views. So that was something we found that Boogaloo boys that we spoke to were keen on getting people to understand more broadly. So that's, I'd say, one of the biggest things that we noticed in terms of their desire to speak with us was to try to dispel what they felt was a misrepresentation of their group by the media in prior reporting. Not to say that that is, accurate for all Boogaloo boys, but for the ones we spoke to, we saw that that was an underlying motivation to get in touch with us.
Did they dislike the association? Because, I mean, if you're running into the Capitol building, let's say, because you're a libertarian, but the guy beside you has a shirt denying the Holocaust, I mean, at some point you might ask yourself, why are we fighting on the same side? What is it that they, did they, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, so there's, they were concerned that they were being misrepresented as racist or white supremacists, but were they bothered by that philosophy?
I would say, specifically with the Jan 6 riots, from some of the people we spoke to in the Boogaloo movement, they wanted to make it clear that they were involved and that they were there at a certain capacity, but that they were there under, specific Boogaloo-centered motivations. So, as we see, there was a lot of different people from different ideologies at the Capitol riots, including the Oath Keepers, the 3%ers, et cetera. The Boogaloo boys, I think, wanted to make it clear that they were there because they want to be on the front lines of any insurrection against the government that's going to happen in this country, but not necessarily because they align directly with other ideologies and their outlooks on race and where the direction of this country should go. So I think that they were fearful of the association with the other groups in terms of differentiating themselves as a group, but they wanted to also make it clear that they were a part of that insurrection. They are there. They are on the front lines of whatever anti-government activity is going to be happening in this country. So there's a fear of association. I think that's true, but I think that they also want to make sure that they are being understood as a group that will be a part of these types of movements.
Well, Kathryn, Hurd, Ellie, Lightfoot, I feel really good about the future of journalism with you guys. You guys are students now, so it's amazing work. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Well done.